June 10, 1967, the Golan Heights, an Israeli M50 Super Sherman, a World War II tank rebuilt with a French gun and an American engine, locks onto a target. The target fires back. It's a Panzer IV, a German tank, built in 1943 for Hitler's army. 22 years after World War II ended, the Sherman destroys it. It's the last known combat kill of a German World War II tank. But here's the real question. How did a German tank from 1943 end up fighting in Syria in 1967? That story begins in the silence after the war. May 8, 1945, Germany surrenders. Across Europe, from Normandy to Berlin, thousands of German tanks sat exactly where their crews had left them. Panthers with empty fuel tanks on Bavarian roads, Tigers with engines destroyed by their own crews, Panzer IVs stripped for parts in forests and fields. The machines that had terrified the world for 5 years were now just steel, rusting in the rain. The Allies walked through these graveyards and faced a strange problem. What do you do with thousands of enemy tanks? The answer split into 4 different paths. Some would be studied, some melted down, some dumped into rivers, and some, the strangest path of all, would end up fighting in wars that hadn't even started yet. The Americans moved first. U.S. technical intelligence teams spread across occupied Germany, cataloging every vehicle they could find: Panthers, Tigers, prototype tanks. But one of the most valuable captures didn't come from an intelligence team. It came from a single soldier who did something insane. Christmas Eve, 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. An American tank commander named Glenn George was leading a patrol through the frozen Ardennes when his crew spotted something in the snow: a King Tiger, a Tiger II, the heaviest, most feared tank in the German arsenal, and it was intact, abandoned, engine cold, crew gone. George didn't call it in. He climbed inside, he started the engine, and then he radioed his battalion commander, Colonel Rubel, to inform him he had captured a King Tiger and was planning to drive it to Berlin. Rubel told him to get out of that tank before some GI sees you and knocks you out. George refused. He drove the Tiger until it ran out of fuel near the small town of Coo, Belgium. Then Rubel made a call to 1st Army headquarters. No intact Tiger II had ever been captured before. This one needed to go to America. The recovery was a nightmare. The tracks were frozen to the ground. They had to pour gasoline around them and set it on fire just to free the tank. The flatbed trailer built for a Sherman was too narrow. The Tiger's tracks hung over both sides. Bridges had to be checked one by one to see if they could hold the weight. But they got it out. By rail to Antwerp, by ship across the Atlantic. Its destination: Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, America's main weapons testing center, and there, alongside dozens of other captured German tanks, engineers did something no one had done during the war. They took Germany's best tanks apart, completely apart. Then they tried to break them. They fired American shells at Panther armor. They compared German optics to those inside American Shermans. They ran engines until they failed, and the results surprised them. German guns were excellent. The Tiger's famous 88mm could destroy almost anything the Allies fielded. The Panther's 75mm gun was extremely accurate at long range. And German optics, many built by Zeiss, were some of the best in the world. At first glance, German tanks looked unbeatable. But what engineers found next would explain why Germany lost the war. The Panther's final drive, the gearbox that powered the tracks, often failed after about 150 kilometers. A Sherman drivetrain could last thousands. The Tiger had another problem: fuel. It burned nearly 3 times as much as a Sherman. It was also so heavy that many European bridges couldn't support it. And if a track broke in combat, recovery was a nightmare. Sometimes you needed another Tiger just to tow the first one. The conclusion from Aberdeen was blunt. German tanks were engineering masterpieces, but logistical disasters. They were designed to win battles, not long wars. The British reached similar conclusions. They tested captured Panthers against their own tanks and found the German armor impressive. but extremely difficult to maintain in the field. The Soviets captured even more. Thousands of German vehicles ended up in Red Army hands. Panzer IVs, Panthers, Stooges. Most were used to train Soviet crews to recognize and fight German vehicles. But by the early 1950s, spare parts were gone. Most of them were simply scrapped, which should have been the end of the story. But it wasn't, because while the superpowers were studying German tanks, other countries were quietly putting them back into service. After 1945, dozens of nations were rebuilding their armies, and they needed tanks. Fast. Germany's abandoned armor suddenly became valuable. France collected around 50 Panthers from German depots and put them into service. The crews loved their firepower, but the maintenance was a disaster. Without spare parts, French mechanics sometimes had to strip 3 Panthers just to keep one running. By 1950, France retired them all. But France wasn't the only country holding German tanks. Czechoslovakia had produced German armored vehicles during the war. After 1945, large stockpiles remained: Panzer IVs, spare parts, factories that knew how to repair them. And when Syria began searching for tanks in the 1950s, Czechoslovakia had exactly what they needed. Between 1950 and 1958, Syria bought around 60 Panzer IVs. Some came from Czechoslovakia, others from French surplus. They were refurbished, fitted with Soviet machine guns, and repainted with Syrian markings. But the strangest deal came last. Back in 1943, Hitler had sold 20 Panzer IVs to Franco's Spain. For 2 decades, they were among Spain's best tanks. Then, in 1967, 24 years after they left German factories, Spain sold 17 of them to Syria. Those tanks were now dug into defensive positions on the Golan Heights, pointed toward Israel, and the tanks Israel would use against them? Modified Shermans, American tanks, from the same war. World War II wasn't over. It had just moved. June 9, 1967. Israeli forces attacked the Golan Heights. Syrian Panzer IVs and Stooges assault guns were dug into bunkers along the ridgeline. Some reportedly still carried faint German markings under their Syrian paint. They had been considered outdated, too slow for offensive operations. Now they were the last line of defense. The next day was a disaster for Syrian forces. Israeli units attacked from multiple directions. Within 15 hours, Syria lost roughly a quarter of its entire vehicle inventory. At least 10 Panzer IVs were destroyed that day by Israeli tanks and aircraft. The last confirmed kill came from an M50 Super Sherman. The Israeli crew probably never knew they were firing at a tank that had rolled off a German assembly line the same year their own Sherman had rolled off an American one. Both machines built in 1943, both still fighting in 1967, on opposite sides of a war neither was designed for. The fighting on the Golan was over in 2 days. But the story of Germany's tanks stretches far beyond any single battlefield. Most were destroyed by 1948, melted down, turned into steel for buildings and bridges. Others were dumped into rivers to reinforce flood barriers. Some were simply used as target practice. A few survived. Today they sit in museums at Bovington, Saumur, and Kubinka. Behind glass, roped off, explained. But not all of them were collected. Some are still out there, in riverbanks in Austria, in forests across Europe, slowly sinking into the ground, and on the Golan Heights, if you know where to look, you can still find what's left of a Panzer IV, half buried in the dust. No markings, no plaque, just a machine built in Germany in 1943, sold to Spain, sold to Syria, destroyed by a Sherman that came off an American assembly line the same year. 2 tanks from the same war, sent around the world in opposite directions, and they met on a hilltop neither of them was ever meant to reach.